The Dakota Territory of 1876 held both promise and peril for those seeking new beginnings. For Catherine Kate Mitchell, the vast prairies and rolling plains represented not just a frontier to be tamed, but a world she perceived differently from others, a world of profound solitude. As the only disfigured survivor of the Henderson Wagon Company, she watched as flames consumed the tall grasses, never seeing the companions who abandoned her to save themselves. Her story of survival against impossible odds would become intertwined with that of Merca Skywatcher Thompson, a half-Sioux scout whose own path was marked by rejection. Together they would forge an unlikely alliance in a land where trust was as scarce as water in drought season. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the Dakota Prairie, transforming the endless sea of grass into a shimmering golden ocean that rippled with each passing breeze. Catherine Mitchell moved through this landscape with practiced determination, gathering buffalo chips for the evening's cook-fire. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied the burden she bore. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her blue-gray eyes missed nothing. But it was the right side of her face that drew inevitable stares, a patchwork of scars that pulled her features into a permanent half-grimace. Born to a prosperous Boston family, Catherine had enjoyed a privileged upbringing until age 17, when a warehouse fire claimed her mother and left Catherine permanently marked. The flames had consumed not only half her face, but also her place in society. Her father, William Mitchell, a respected merchant, had spent a fortune on doctors who promised miraculous cures, but delivered only disappointment. After his death last autumn, Catherine discovered that his business had been failing for years, leaving her with nothing but debts and painful memories. The Henderson Wagon Company had been her last hope, a chance to travel west to Montana Territory, where her father's cousin had offered her a position as a schoolteacher. "Children are more forgiving than adults," he had written, "and frontier towns can't afford to judge a teacher by her appearance." Catherine paused in her gathering, straightening to ease the ache in her back from sleeping on the hard ground. The morning was still young, the camp only beginning to stir. 15 wagons formed a protective circle around the central cooking area, where Mrs. Henderson, the wagon master's wife, was already stoking the breakfast fire. Children darted between wagons, their laughter carrying on the wind, while men checked harnesses and women organized supplies for the day's journey. The Mitchell wagon stood at the eastern edge of the circle, the canvas cover patched in several places, the cheapest transport Catherine could afford. She shared it with the Wilson family, Frank, a carpenter seeking work in the booming Montana mining towns, his pregnant wife Sarah, and their 3 young children who, after initial fearful glances, had grown accustomed to Catherine's appearance. "Miss Mitchell," Sarah called, waving Catherine back to their wagon. "Come have some coffee before it gets cold." Catherine nodded, grateful for Sarah's unfailing kindness, unlike many of the other travelers who averted their eyes or whispered behind her back. Sarah treated her with simple human dignity. As she approached, Catherine noticed Mr. Henderson deep in conversation with several men, their expressions grave as they studied a horizon that seemed different somehow, hazier than usual. "The men are worried," Sarah murmured as she handed Catherine a tin cup of coffee. "There's been no rain for weeks, and the grass is tinder dry. Mr. Henderson says we need to reach the Platte River crossing by nightfall." Catherine sipped the bitter coffee, watching the men's discussion. Her father had taught her to read weather and terrain during their infrequent hunting trips, rare occasions when they could escape Boston society's judgmental gaze. The faint discoloration along the western horizon troubled her, but she kept her concerns to herself. The wagon company already considered her an unfortunate burden. No need to add fearmonger to their assessment. As the company prepared to depart, Catherine helped Sarah secure their belongings and settle the children in the wagon. Frank had ridden ahead at first light with several other men to scout the trail, leaving the women to manage alone, a common arrangement on the frontier journey. "Catherine," Sarah said softly as they worked, "I've been meaning to speak with you about something." She hesitated, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. "Frank and I have discussed it, and we want you to know that when we reach Montana, you're welcome to stay with us until you get settled. The children adore you, and frankly, I could use the help when the baby comes." Emotion tightened Catherine's throat, an unexpected kindness she hadn't dared hope for. "That's very generous," she managed. "I wouldn't want to impose nonsense," Sarah interrupted with a warm smile. "Consider it settled." The wagons lurched into motion, forming a long train that wound its way through the prairie like a great canvas serpent. Catherine walked alongside the Wilson wagon, preferring the exercise to the jostling ride inside. The morning passed uneventfully, the monotonous rhythm of creaking wheels and plodding oxen, broken only by occasional commands from the drivers or children's questions. It was nearing midday when Catherine first smelled it. A faint, acrid scent, carried on the strengthening wind. She looked west again, her heart skipping at the sight that greeted her. What had been a hazy discoloration hours earlier was now an ominous dark smudge stretching across the horizon, and it was growing visibly larger. "Mr. Henderson!" she called out, quickening her pace to reach the wagon-master. "There's smoke to the west!" Henderson pulled his wagon to a halt, standing on the seat to peer in the direction Catherine indicated. His weathered face paled as he assessed what she had already recognized, a prairie fire, driven by the wind, moving directly toward them. "Sound the horn!" he bellowed to his son. "Circle the wagons, now!" Chaos erupted as the warning spread. Drivers whipped their teams into frantic motion, jockeying for position on the limited flat ground. Catherine ran back to the Wilson wagon, helping Sarah gather the terrified children. "What's happening?" Sarah gasped, clutching her youngest to her chest. "Prairie fire," Catherine explained, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We need to prepare. Where's your plow blade?" Every experienced wagon train carried implements that could be repurposed for emergencies. A plow blade dragged behind horses could cut a firebreak, a strip of turned earth that might halt the flames' advance. But as the Wilsons' wagon lurched into the forming circle, Catherine realized with growing dread that the company had too. Few plows and too little time. Henderson was shouting orders, organizing men to begin a backfire, a controlled burn that would consume the fuel before the main fire arrived. Others were wetting blankets and canvas, preparing to beat out sparks that crossed their makeshift defenses. "The children," Catherine told Sarah firmly, "get them into the center of the circle, wet their clothes if possible." As Sarah herded her frightened family toward relative safety, Catherine grabbed 2 empty water buckets and ran to join the line of people passing water from the barrels to those preparing the defenses. The air had grown noticeably hotter, the smoke thickening with each passing minute. Through the haze, she could see the fire clearly now, a wall of orange and red devouring the prairie grasses at terrifying speed. "It's moving too fast," someone shouted. "The backfire won't catch in time." Henderson made a decision. "Abandon the outer wagons," he commanded. "Save what you can carry and move to the center." The Wilsons' wagon was among those on the perimeter. Catherine sprinted back, finding Sarah struggling to gather essentials while managing her panicked children. "Take them," Catherine urged, lifting the youngest boy into her arms. "I'll grab what I can and follow." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn, but the approaching roar of the fire decided her. With a quick squeeze of Catherine's hand, she gathered her other children and hurried toward the center of the circled wagons. Catherine worked frantically, securing the family's money pouch, important documents, and a small bundle of clothes. The superheated air seared her lungs with each breath, and embers were already falling around her like deadly snow. She had just turned to leave when a burning branch, carried aloft by the fire's convection, crashed through the wagon canvas, igniting the dry wood and supplies inside. The explosion of flame knocked Catherine backward, sending her tumbling down the far side of the wagon, away from the circle's center. Pain lanced through her leg as she landed awkwardly, twisting her ankle. Dazed and half-blinded by smoke, she struggled to her feet, disoriented. "Help!" she called out, but her voice was lost in the fire's deafening roar. Through watering eyes, she saw shadowy figures moving within the wagon circle, but no one looked her way. The fire was upon them now, and survival instinct had taken hold. In that moment of clarity, Catherine understood a terrible truth. In the chaos and panic, with her scarred face making her less recognizable through the smoke, no one would realize she was missing until it was too late. She was on her own, caught between the advancing fire and the steep slope of a ravine she hadn't noticed before. With the wagon company already unreachable through the wall of flame, Catherine made the only choice available, clutching the small bundle of salvaged items. She half ran, half stumbled down the ravine toward the faint promise of a creek bed below. The world around her had transformed into a hellscape of heat, smoke, and terror. As she slid down the steep embankment, rocks tearing at her skirt and hands, Catherine Mitchell knew with grim certainty that her journey west had taken a turn no one could have anticipated, and that her survival would depend entirely on her own resourcefulness in a land that had already tried to claim her once before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ravine provided Catherine's only refuge as the inferno raged above her. Sliding and tumbling down the steep slope, she landed hard on the dried creek bed below, the impact driving precious air from her lungs. Above her, the sky had vanished behind a rolling canopy of black smoke, punctuated by spiraling embers that drifted down like malevolent fireflies. She pressed her face against the earth, breathing through a dampened section of her skirt. The creek had been dry for weeks, but its bed offered a natural firebreak. For now, the bundle she'd managed to salvage lay beside her. Sarah's family documents, a small pouch of coins, and a woolen shawl, now singed along one edge. The roar above was deafening, a living beast consuming everything in its path. Catherine had witnessed fire's devastating power before, had felt its searing touch upon her own flesh, but nothing had prepared her for this elemental fury. Prairie fires were legends told around campfires, cautionary tales of God's wrath, unleashed upon the plains. Now she was living the nightmare, heat pressed down like a physical weight, stealing her breath and causing her skin to tighten painfully. Her throat burned with each inhalation. Survival instinct took over as she clawed at the dry creek bed, desperately scooping out a shallow depression in the earth. She pressed herself into this meager shelter, covering her body with the woolen shawl dampened by the last precious drops from her canteen. Time lost meaning as the firestorm passed overhead. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, marked only by the thundering heartbeat in her chest and the searing pain of each breath. Catherine retreated into her mind, seeking refuge in memories of cool Boston gardens and her mother's gentle voice reading poetry on summer evenings. She would not die here, anonymous and forgotten in this savage wilderness. When the roaring finally began to subside, Catherine cautiously pulled the shawl from her face. The air remained thick with smoke and ash, but the immediate danger of the flames had passed. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. Dehydration and shock had taken their toll, leaving her lightheaded and disoriented. The landscape had been transformed. Where lush prairie grasses had stretched to the horizon, only blackened earth remained, still smouldering in places like the embers of a massive hearth. The ravine had saved her life, but it had also cut her off from the wagon train. Even if some had survived, and she prayed fervently that Sarah and her children had, they would assume she had perished in the flames. Catherine took stock of her situation with ruthless honesty, a skill honed during years of facing societal rejection. After her disfigurement, her ankle was swollen but not broken. The small bundle of salvaged items contained no food. Her canteen was empty, and she had no clear idea which direction might lead to safety. The sun was beginning its westward descent, barely visible through the haze of smoke still hanging in the air. Night would bring dangerous cold to contrast the day's infernal heat, the cruel duality of prairie existence. She needed shelter, water, and a plan. Rising unsteadily to her feet, Catherine tested her injured ankle. Pain shot up her leg, but it bore her weight. Using a sturdy branch as a makeshift cane, she began following the dry creek bed, reasoning that it must eventually lead to water. Perhaps even the Platte River the wagon train had been aiming to. A reach. The ravine provided some navigation advantage. Its walls, though blackened, still rose several feet above the surrounding plains, allowing her to see farther across the desolate landscape. Catherine moved slowly, each step deliberate on the uneven ground. Wilderness survival wasn't completely foreign to her. Those hunting trips with her father had taught her basic principles. Find water, seek shelter, conserve energy. As twilight deepened into dusk, Catherine had covered perhaps 2 miles of tortuous terrain. Her throat felt like sandpaper, her lips cracked and bleeding. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her determination, the creek bed widened, and the unmistakable scent of moisture reached her nostrils. Rounding a gentle bend, she discovered a shallow pool, miraculously preserved in a depression beneath. An overhanging rock. Catherine nearly wept at the sight. The water was cloudy and smelled faintly of minerals, but it was wetness in a world turned to ash. She restrained her desperate thirst, remembering her father's warning about drinking too quickly after prolonged dehydration. Small sips. Wait, more small sips. The pool's rocky overhang offered rudimentary shelter for the night. Catherine gathered what unburned branches she could find, constructing a crude barrier against the night winds that were already beginning to stir the ash into miniature cyclones across the blackened plains. Using flint from the coin pouch and steel from her hair clasp, she managed to ignite a small fire, controlled this time, a servant rather than a master. As darkness claimed the prairie, Catherine huddled beside her meager flame, the irony not lost on her, seeking comfort from the very element that had nearly destroyed her. The night sky emerged, impossibly vast and brilliant, with stars untouched by the devastation below. Their cold, distant beauty offered no comfort. For the first time since the fire, Catherine allowed herself to truly feel the magnitude of her situation. She was alone in an unfamiliar wilderness, injured with minimal supplies. The nearest settlement could be dozens of miles away. The wagon train, if any had survived, would be continuing westward, assuming her dead. A coyote's plaintive howl echoed across the blackened expanse, answered by another more distant call. Catherine added fuel to her fire, the instinctive human response to unseen predators in the darkness. She thought of Sarah Wilson, hoping desperately that the woman and her children had reached safety. The memory of their kindness stood in stark contrast to the many who had recoiled from her scarred appearance over the years. "You're stronger than you know," her father had told her after the Boston fire, when she'd fallen into despondency during her recovery. "Beauty fades for everyone eventually, but character, that's what carries you through life's darkest passages." Catherine touched the ravaged side of her face, feeling the familiar landscape of scar tissue. She had survived fire once before. She would survive again. Morning arrived with cruel brightness, the sun reflecting off ash particles still suspended in the air. Catherine woke stiff and chilled, her fire long extinguished. The small pool had replenished somewhat overnight, allowing her to refill her canteen and wash the worst of the ash from her face and hands. Her ankle had stiffened during the night, the swelling visibly worse. After a breakfast of water and desperate resolution, Catherine continued following the creek bed. Logic suggested it would eventually join a larger waterway, perhaps even the Platte River that had been the wagon train's destination. Larger waterways meant settlements, or at least the possibility of encountering other travelers. The morning's journey proved increasingly difficult. The creek bed narrowed in places, forcing her to climb over fallen rocks and debris. By midday, the smoke haze had cleared enough to provide a better view of her surroundings. Miles of blackened prairie stretched in all directions. A charred, alien landscape. But far to the southeast, a line of green suggested the fire's devastation had limits. Her progress was agonizingly slow. The makeshift cane supported her weight, but each step sent sharp pain through her injured ankle. Twice she stopped to rest, conserving her dwindling water supply with disciplined restraint. The sun beat down mercilessly the blackened earth, absorbing and radiating heat like a massive oven. By late afternoon, Catherine's strength was failing. Her vision blurred occasionally, and the temptation to simply sit and rest grew nearly overwhelming. Only stubborn determination kept her moving forward, one painful step after another. The creek bed had widened again, suggesting it might indeed be leading toward a larger waterway, but the distance remained impossible to judge through the heat-distorted air. A strange buzzing filled her ears as she stumbled over a protruding rock. Catherine caught herself against the creek bank, her hand sinking into ash that still retained residual warmth from the fire. The world tilted alarmingly, horizon and sky trading places in a nauseating swirl of black and blue. She knew the signs of severe dehydration and heat exhaustion, had studied medical texts after her own burn treatment, but knowledge offered little protection against physical collapse. Catherine slid down against the creek bank, no longer able to command her trembling legs. The canteen contained perhaps 2 mouthfuls of warm water, which she rationed with shaking hands. Far overhead, a hawk circled lazily on thermal currents, its distant cry reaching her as if through layers of cotton wool. Not yet, she whispered to herself, to God, to whatever spirits might inhabit this desolate place. I didn't come this far to die alone in the dirt. But her body had reached its limits. The combined trauma of the fire, injury, and exposure had depleted her reserves. As consciousness began to fade, Catherine's blurring vision caught movement. On the horizon, a darker shape against the black landscape. Animal or human, salvation or threat, she couldn't tell. Her last coherent thought before darkness claimed her was that at least she would not have to watch death's approach. Marker Thompson tracked the edge of the burn zone with practiced efficiency, his eyes constantly scanning the devastation for signs of survivors. 3 days had passed since the massive prairie fire had swept through the territory, and hope was fading for any stragglers from the wagon train reported missing by the handful who'd made it to Fort Laramie. At 32, McGah had spent most of his adult life between worlds. Born to a Sioux mother and a white cavalry officer who'd actually married her, a rarity in these territories, he'd been educated in Eastern schools until his father's death, then returned to the plains, where his mother's people reluctantly welcomed back their white-minded son. Now he served as a scout for both the U.S. Army and the Sioux Nation, walking a precarious line between cultures that viewed each other with increasing hostility. His unique position earned him respect from some, suspicion from many, and true acceptance from almost none. Sky Watcher, the elders called him, partly for his habit of reading weather patterns, partly as acknowledgement of his tendency to observe from a distance rather than participate fully in tribal life. The name suited him better than the Matthew his father had insisted upon at his birth. His buckskin clothing was a blend of Sioux and white styles, practical for the harsh prairie. Environment. A Winchester rifle rested across his saddle, while traditional medicine pouches hung alongside army-issue binoculars. Everything about him spoke of duality. His coppery skin, his hazel eyes, the fluent English and Dakota that allowed him to translate both words and worldviews. Maka had been at Fort Laramie when the survivors staggered in. 8 people from a company of nearly 40, their faces black with soot, eyes hollow with the horror they'd witnessed. The army commander had immediately dispatched Maka to search for others who might have escaped the inferno. Not much hope after 3 days, Lieutenant Wells had stated bluntly, but we need to account for everyone. And if there are survivors, the unspoken reality hung in the air. Weakened, injured people alone on the prairie were vulnerable to exposure, predators, and hostile parties taking advantage of their desperate situation. The scouting mission was as much about recovery as rescue. Identification of the dead would bring closure to families back east who would otherwise wonder forever about the fate of loved ones. For 2 days, Maka had followed the burn zone's perimeter, occasionally venturing into the blackened landscape when signs warranted investigation. He'd found 3 bodies already, men who'd apparently tried outrunning the flames on horseback, only to be overtaken when their mounts panicked. There was little left to identify them beyond metal objects, belt buckles, watch chains, a wedding ring that would be sent east to some grieving widow. Maka pushed aside these grim thoughts as he guided his pinto gelding along a dry creek bed cutting through the devastated prairie. Watercourses offered natural fire breaks. Anyone with frontier knowledge might seek such protection from advancing flames. The creek bed widened as he progressed, revealing occasional boot prints in the ash-dusted sand. Someone had passed this way recently. Someone on foot, moving unsteadily based on the irregular spacing and depth of the prints. The tracks had been made after the fire. There was no ash settled over them. Maka dismounted, leading his horse as he followed the trail. With growing interest, the person was injured. The right footprint showed they were favoring that leg, and occasional handprints in the soil indicated they had stumbled or braced themselves against the bank. A smudge of blood on a protruding rock confirmed his assessment. The tracks continued for nearly a mile before he spotted the crumpled form ahead, half concealed against the base of the creek bank. From a distance, it appeared to be nothing more than a heap of ash-covered cloth. But as Maka approached cautiously, rifle at the ready, he recognized the outline of a woman's dress and the pale hand extended limply across the dry soil. He secured his rifle and closed the distance quickly, dropping to one knee beside the motionless figure. Ash and dirt covered most of her features, but the rise and fall of her chest, shallow but present, confirmed she still lived. Gently, he rolled her onto her back to assess her condition. The woman's face startled him, not for the layer of grime, but for what lay beneath it. The right side was a map of old burn scars, the skin puckered and discolored from hairline to jaw. The left side, by contrast, retained the smooth complexion of a woman in her mid-20s, creating a stark division down the center of her face. Maka had seen many injuries in his years as a scout, but these scars were different. Older, long-healed, unrelated to the current disaster. The woman had survived fire before. There was something almost mythic in this realization, like a sign from the spirits his mother's people believed guided all living things. Her pulse was rapid but weak, her skin hot with fever and dangerously dry. Without immediate help, she would not survive another day. Maka retrieved his canteen, supporting her head as he carefully dripped water between her cracked lips. She didn't regain consciousness, but swallowed reflexively, a promising sign. Near her hand lay a small bundle, tied with singed ribbon. Maka examined it briefly. family documents for someone named Wilson, a pouch containing a modest sum in coins, and a silver locket containing the portrait of an older man with kind eyes, her father perhaps. With the efficiency born of necessity, Maka tore strips from his spare shirt to create a compress for her forehead. He bandaged her injured ankle, noting the severe swelling and discoloration that suggested a serious sprain rather than a break. Throughout his ministrations, the woman remained unconscious, occasional soft moans the only indication of life. The BU decision confronting him was straightforward but significant. Fort Laramie lay 3 days' ride southwest. The closest Sioux encampment, where his mother now lived, was just over a day's journey north. The woman needed immediate care beyond what he could provide in the field. Maka stood, surveying the blackened landscape. Taking her to the fort meant a longer journey, increasing her risk. Taking her to the Sioux camp would be faster, potentially saving her life, but might place her in another kind of danger. Relations between settlers and natives had deteriorated rapidly in recent months, with violations of the Fort Laramie Treaty creating bitter resentment among the tribes. A white woman, especially one already marked by tragedy, would receive care at his mother's insistence, but her reception by the wider community was unpredictable. Some would see offering aid as an opportunity to demonstrate moral superiority over whites, who rarely extended similar compassion to injured natives. Others might view her as an unwelcome burden, or worse, a potential hostage in the escalating conflict. The woman's condition made the choice for him. She wouldn't survive the longer journey to Fort Laramie. With careful movements, Maka constructed a travois from saplings that had survived along the creek bank, lashing them together with leather strips from his gear and creating a sling from his blanket. He secured her small bundle of possessions alongside her, then lifted her gently onto the improvised transport. As he mounted his horse and began the journey northward, leading the travois across the ash-covered prairie, Maka reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together, both marked by fire in different ways, he by the metaphorical fire of living between warring cultures, she by literal flames that had twice touched her life. There was meaning in such connections, his mother would say. The spirits did not create such patterns without purpose. The woman stirred briefly as they crossed from the burned zone into untouched grassland, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. They were the clear blue of a winter sky, clouded now with confusion and pain. Her cracked lips moved, forming a question he couldn't quite catch. Maka leaned closer. "Safe," she whispered hoarsely. "Are they safe?" "Rest," he replied, unsure who she referred to, but wanting to give her peace. "You're not alone anymore." Her eyes closed again, whether from this assurance or simple exhaustion, he couldn't tell. Maka continued northward, the rhythm of his horse's hooves and the soft shifting of the travois runners against the prairie grass, creating a steady cadence that measured their progress toward uncertain sanctuary. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 15 miles, a respectable distance considering the care required to keep the travois steady over uneven terrain. Maka made camp in a sheltered draw where a spring bubbled up from beneath a rock outcropping. The water here was clean and cool, a blessing for his feverish charge. He built a small fire, mindful of the recent devastation, but needing its heat to ward off the prairie night's chill. After securing his horse, Maka turned his attention to the woman, who remained largely unconscious but occasionally mumbled incoherent phrases. The fever worried him most. Infection from her injuries, or simply the trauma of extreme exposure, he couldn't be certain. His mother had taught him basic healing practices, combining traditional Sioux medicine with practical knowledge gained during her years married to an army officer. Maka now drew on this training, creating a poultice from wild herbs gathered near the spring. He applied it to the woman's ankle, wrapping it with fresh bandages torn from his remaining spare shirt. For her fever, he crushed willow bark into the spring water, supporting her head as he coaxed her to drink the bitter medicine. It was rudimentary care, but it might be enough to keep her alive until they reached his mother's skilled hands. As the stars emerged overhead in brilliant constellations, Maka studied the woman's face in the firelight. The old burn scars told a story of previous suffering, but also of remarkable survival. Whatever fire had marked her had failed to destroy her. There was strength in that, a resilience he recognized and respected. "What's your name?" he asked softly, though he expected no response. "What journey brought you to this place?" To his surprise, her eyes opened slightly, focusing on him with momentary clarity. "Catherine," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Catherine Mitchell." "Rest now, Catherine Mitchell," Maka replied. "Tomorrow we reach my mother's people." Her eyes closed again, but her breathing seemed slightly easier, her expression less pained. Maka added wood to the fire and settled, back against his saddle, rifle within easy reach, a habit of vigilance formed through years on the frontier. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. For tonight, it was enough that they had both survived another day in this unforgiving land. Dawn broke with a crimson intensity that painted the prairie in blood-red hues. Maka had been awake for an hour already, checking Catherine's condition and preparing for the final leg of their journey. Her fever had neither broken nor worsened overnight, a small mercy that gave him hope she might survive long enough to receive proper care. Catherine drifted between unconsciousness and brief moments of confused awareness. During one such interval, she accepted water and a few bites of dried meat that Maka softened for her, but her strength remained perilously depleted. The ankle had swollen further despite his poultice, its angry purple discoloration suggesting deeper damage than a simple sprain. "We ride soon," Maka told her, as he secured the travois behind his horse. "My mother's people are camped near Eagle Creek. They have medicines that will help you." Fear flickered across Catherine's face as comprehension penetrated her fever haze. "Sioux," she whispered. Maka nodded, understanding her apprehension. Newspaper accounts of Indian savagery rarely distinguished between tribes or acknowledged the complex relationships between natives and settlers. Most Easterners arrived on the frontier carrying generations of prejudice wrapped in tales of scalping and captivity. "My mother is Dakota Sioux," he explained, using the term his people called themselves. "I am of both worlds. You will be safe." Catherine studied his face with unexpected intensity, as if gauging the truth of his words. The rational part of her mind, the part not clouded by fever and trauma, seemed to understand she had no real alternative. Her slight nod signaled reluctant acceptance rather than trust. They traveled steadily through the morning, the landscape gradually changing as they moved northward. The endless flat prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with stands of cottonwood trees. Occasional creeks, still flowing despite the summer heat, cut meandering paths through the grasslands. By midday, Maka spotted the first sign of the Dakota camp, thin columns of smoke rising above a distant ridge where Eagle Creek curved through a sheltered valley. He adjusted their course slightly, approaching from the southeast, where sentries would recognize him easily and not mistake their small party for a threat. "We're almost there," he told Catherine, who had been silent for hours, conserving her meager strength. "The camp has nearly 30 lodges this season. My mother is respected as a healer among the people." Whether she heard or understood his words was unclear. Her eyes remained closed, face flushed with fever. Maka pressed forward, with renewed urgency, sensing that her condition was deteriorating. They were spotted a mile from camp. 2 young Dakota warriors appeared on a ridge ahead, mounted on paint ponies, adorned with feathers and leather decorations. They carried rifles, prized possessions that symbolized both status and the evolving nature of warfare on the plains. Recognizing Maka, they raised their hands in greeting rather than alarm. Maka returned the gesture, then called out in Lakota, "I bring an injured woman who needs Water Lily's care." He used his mother's Sioux name, the one she had reclaimed after his father's death when she returned to her people. The young men approached cautiously, their curiosity evident as they inspected the travois and its pale-skinned passenger. 1. Maka recognized him as Red Fox's son, frowned slightly. "A white woman?" he questioned in Lakota. "From the Firelands?" He gestured toward the distant southern horizon where smoke had been visible for days. "Yes. She survived the great burning, but needs medicine quickly." The second warrior studied Catherine more closely, noting her scarred face. "She carries old fire marks already," he observed. "The spirits have tested her twice with flame." This observation seemed to shift something in their assessment. Old wounds suggested stories worth knowing, experiences that might carry wisdom. In Lakota culture, physical marks from survival were not viewed with revulsion, but often as signs of a significant life journey. "Go ahead," the first warrior said, making a decision. "We will alert the camp." With that, they wheeled their ponies and galloped toward the valley, carrying word of Maka's arrival with his unusual charge. By the time Maka crested the final ridge overlooking Eagle Creek, a small crowd had gathered at the camp's edge. Children stood on tiptoes for a better view, while women paused in their daily tasks to watch the approaching travois. Men maintained a dignified distance, but observed with undisguised interest. At the forefront stood Water Lily, Maka's mother. Though in her mid-50s, she carried herself with the straight-back dignity that had first caught the eye of Captain James Thompson 25 years earlier at a frontier treaty signing. Her black hair, now streaked with silver, was braided, simply rather than elaborately adorned, as befitted her status as a respected healer. She wore a practical leather dress decorated with simple beadwork. Her hands were too valuable for mundane decorative tasks. Water Lily's expression revealed nothing as her son approached with the injured white woman. Years of frontier diplomacy had taught her to keep her thoughts private, especially when outsiders were present. But Maka knew her well enough to recognize the slight narrowing of her eyes that signaled concern mixed with calculation. "Mother?" Maka greeted her in English, a deliberate choice to acknowledge the duality of the situation. "This is Catherine Mitchell. She survived the prairie fire but needs your medicine." Water Lily knelt beside the travois, her practiced hands immediately checking Catherine's pulse and temperature. She lifted one eyelid, then examined the swollen ankle without disturbing the bandages. Her assessment complete, she stood and issued commands in rapid Lakota. "Bring her to my lodge. Greyhawk, fetch fresh water from the upper spring. Young Fawn, prepare the fever tea with white willow and prairie cone flower. Quick now, her spirit walks close to the Shadowlands." 4 young men carefully lifted the travois, carrying Catherine toward a large teepee near the center of camp. Its exterior was painted with symbols of healing, plants, stars, and animals that provided medicine. Water Lily followed, already removing pouches of herbs from a parfleche bag at her waist. Maka remained behind, suddenly aware of the scrutiny directed his way by the gathered tribal members. His position as mediator between worlds always grew more complicated when those worlds physically intersected, as they did now in the form of Catherine Mitchell. Standing bare, one of the camp's elder warriors approached with measured steps. His weathered face had witnessed nearly 70 winters, earning him respect from even the most hot-headed young men. "Sky Watcher walks dangerous paths," he observed in Lakota, using Maka's tribal name. "The white soldiers search for their lost people, They will think we have taken this woman if they find her here. I will ride to Fort Laramie tomorrow, Maka replied. I will tell them one survivor was found and is receiving care. Standing Bear's expression remained skeptical. These days, white men look for reasons to break the treaty. A woman with fire-marked face may become such a reason. The concern was valid. Relations had grown increasingly strained as gold-seeking. Parties repeatedly violated Sioux territory despite treaty agreements. The Army's half-hearted efforts to prevent these incursions had created deep resentment among tribal leaders. Hosting an injured white woman, even with benevolent intentions, could become politically complicated. She would have died had I taken her directly to the fort, Maka explained. Once she can travel, I will ensure her safe return. Their conversation was interrupted by Swift Deer, a young warrior who had recently earned his name in a daring buffalo hunt. Unlike the more cautious elders, he made no attempt to hide his displeasure. Why should we heal those who burn our hunting grounds? He demanded, loud enough for others to hear. Their iron horse spits fire that kills the grass. Their hunters slaughter buffalo and leave the meat to rot. Now their carelessness brings the great fire that drives game from our territory. Murmurs of agreement rose from several younger men. Tensions that had been simmering for months found focus in Catherine's presence, an easy target for accumulated grievances. Maka met Swift Deer's challenging gaze steadily. The woman did not bring the fire. She nearly died in it, like many of her own people. Would you judge her for the actions of all whites, as they judge us for the actions of other tribes? This logic gave Swift Deer pause, though his expression remained defiant. Before he could formulate a response, a commanding female voice cut through the growing tension. My son speaks wisdom. Water Lily had emerged from her lodge, hands still glistening with herbal remedies. The woman fights bravely against the spirit of fever. Such courage deserves respect, regardless of skin color. Her status as healer gave her words special weight. In Dakota culture, those who walked with healing spirits occupied a unique position. Their judgment in matters of life and death carried authority that transcended ordinary tribal politics. I have placed medicine on her burns and bound her damaged ankle, Water Lily continued, but the journey through fire has seared more than her flesh. Her spirit wanders between worlds. Tonight we will hold a healing ceremony. This announcement shifted the mood subtly. Ceremonies were communal activities that reinforced tribal bonds. Including Catherine in such a ritual wasn't merely medical treatment, but a gesture of temporary inclusion. Not as an equal, but as someone under the tribe's protection. Standing Bear nodded slowly, acceptance, if not enthusiasm, in his posture. Water Lily's lodge, Water Lily's decision, but the white woman remains your responsibility, Sky Watcher. I accept this, Maka agreed, relief evident in his voice. The immediate crisis of Catherine's acceptance had been navigated, though long-term complications remained unresolved. As the crowd dispersed, returning to interrupted tasks, Maka approached his mother's lodge. He paused at the entrance, respecting the sacred space of healing. Enter, Water Lily called, recognizing his presence without seeing him, a mother's intuition that had always unnerved him slightly. Inside, the lodge was dim and fragrant, with medicinal herbs burning in a small clay bowl. Catherine lay on a bed of soft buffalo robes, her torn and filthy dress replaced with a simple buckskin shift. Her face had been cleaned of ash and dirt, making the division between scarred and unscarred skin more pronounced. Cool compresses covered her forehead and throat, while a poultice of green paste wrapped her injured ankle. "Will she live?" Maka asked, keeping his voice low, though he doubted Catherine could hear them in her semi-conscious state. Water Lily's hands continued grinding herbs with practiced efficiency. Her body is strong despite its weakened state, but healing requires more than medicine. It requires will. She glanced at Catherine's scarred face. This one has faced fire before and survived. Such experiences either strengthen the spirit or shatter it. We will know by morning which path her spirit chooses." Mahka nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in his mother's words. Physical recovery was only part of survival. He had seen strong men waste away despite healing bodies because their spirits had been broken by trauma. Conversely, he'd witnessed remarkable recoveries when the will to live burned bright enough. "Rest now," Water Lily instructed, her tone softening slightly. "You have ridden far and carried much responsibility. Tonight's ceremony will require your strength as her bridge between worlds." As Mahka turned to leave, Catherine's eyes flickered open, clarity momentarily replacing fever haze. Her gaze fixed on him with unexpected lucidity. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible, "for not leaving me behind." The simple statement carried weight beyond its brevity, acknowledgement of the abandonment she had suffered, and gratitude for his contrary choice. Before Mahka could respond, her eyes closed again, exhaustion reclaiming her. Outside the lodge, Mahka paused to survey the bustling camp. Children played traditional games while women worked hides and prepared food. Men gathered in small groups, discussing hunting plans and tribal matters. Normal life continued, despite the unusual presence in their midst. Yet beneath this ordinary surface, Mahka sensed subtle currents of tension. Catherine Mitchell's arrival had disturbed more than just daily routines. It had raised uncomfortable questions about obligations, boundaries, and the possibility of connection across cultural divides that grew wider with each broken treaty and misunderstanding. As the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the valley, Mahka found himself wondering what dawn would bring, both for the injured woman fighting for her life and for those whose decision to help her carried unforeseen consequences in these increasingly troubled times. The healing ceremony began at sunset. Catherine, drifting between consciousness and fever dreams, was only vaguely aware of the shifting shadows and murmured voices that surrounded her. Water Lily's lodge had been transformed. Buffalo hides covered the floor, aromatic cedar branches burned in the central fire pit, and various healing objects formed a circle around Catherine's resting place. Water Lily sat cross-legged at her, patient's head, her silver-streaked hair unbound for the ceremony. She wore a special dress adorned with porcupine quills and elk teeth that signified her status as a medicine woman. Around her neck hung a leather pouch containing sacred objects passed down through generations of healers. 6 other participants completed the circle, Mahka standing bare, 2 elderly women known for their healing songs, and 2 younger women who would assist with the practical aspects of the healing ritual. Each had purified themselves in the sweat lodge before entering, and each brought a specific energy to the ceremonial space. "The woman walks between worlds," Water Lily began, speaking in Lakota. "Fire has marked her twice, once long ago, leaving its sign upon her face, and now again, testing her spirit on the burned prairie. Tonight we call her spirit back fully, to this world." She began a low chanting, a melody so ancient its origins had been forgotten. The other participants joined, creating harmonies that filled the lodge with vibrating energy. Mahka, who had spent years distancing himself from many tribal spiritual practices during his education in white schools, felt the familiar power of the songs resonate in his chest. Standing Bear added a rhythmic drum beat, the buffalo hide drums, deep voice providing foundation for the healing songs. Water Lily moved methodically around Catherine's still form, wafting sacred smoke from burning sweetgrass and sage over her body. At each of the 4 directions, she paused to invoke spiritual assistance. From the east, bring wisdom to heal her mind. From the south, bring warmth to strengthen her body. From the west, bring reflection to calm her spirit. From the north, bring endurance to restore her will. Catherine stirred slightly as the ceremony progressed, her breathing becoming more regular. When Water Lily placed healing hands on her forehead, a soft sigh escaped her lips, the first sound she had made in hours. The ceremony continued past midnight, moving through traditional stages of summoning, cleansing, strengthening, and protecting. Mika remained focused throughout, occasionally translating specific prayers when Water Lily indicated he should. Though Catherine couldn't understand the words, the intention behind them, the genuine desire for healing, transcended language. Barriers. Near the ceremony's conclusion, Catherine's eyes opened. Clear and aware for the first time since Maka had found her, she gazed up at the lodge's smoke hole where stars were visible in the night sky. A single tear tracked down her scarred cheek. Water Lily noted this sign with satisfaction. Her spirit has returned fully to her body, she announced. The healing may now truly begin. As the participants filed out of the lodge, Maka remained behind at his mother's request. Catherine watched him with cautious awareness, her gaze shifting between him and Water Lily as the older woman prepared a tea infused with medicinal herbs. "Where am I?" Catherine asked, her voice raspy from disuse and smoke inhalation. "You're in my mother's lodge," Maka answered. "Among the Dakota people near Eagle Creek. You've been very ill with fever for 2 days." "The fire," she began, fragments of memory surfacing. "Is long past," he assured her. "You're safe now." Water Lily approached with the herbal tea, gesturing for Maka to help Catherine sit up enough to drink. As he supported her shoulders, Maka noted that her fever had indeed broken. Her skin no longer burned with unnatural heat. "Drink," Water Lily instructed, speaking English with the slight accent that remained, despite her years married to a white man. "It will strengthen your blood." Catherine hesitated only briefly before accepting the offered cup. The bitter liquid made her wince, but she drank it dutifully under Water Lily's watchful gaze. "Thank you," she said when finished, addressing both mother and son. "I remember pieces. You found me." This to Maka. "And you healed me." To Water Lily. The older woman nodded simply, accepting the gratitude without embellishment. "Rest now. Morning brings more medicine." With that practical statement, she collected her ceremonial items and retreated to the lodge's side chamber, leaving Maka briefly alone with their patient. "The wagon train?" Catherine asked, eyes suddenly anxious. "The Wilsons? Did anyone else survive?" Maka chose his words carefully. 8 people reached Fort Laramie. I don't know their names. When you're stronger, I'll ride to the fort and inquire about these Wilsons." Relief and sorrow mingled in her expression. 8 out of nearly 40. She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this reality. "They must think I perished in the fire." "I will correct that misunderstanding when I go to the fort," Maka assured her. "But my mother is right. You need rest to regain your strength. We can speak more tomorrow." Catherine nodded, already drifting towards sleep, the ceremony and medicinal tea having drained her limited reserves. Maka pulled a soft buffalo robe over her before quietly exiting the lodge. Outside, the camp had settled into nighttime stillness, with only a few fires still burning. Standing Bear awaited him, smoking a pipe as he contemplated the stars. "White woman's spirit has returned," Maka stated, accepting the pipe when offered. Standing Bear nodded. "Water Lily's medicine is strong, but healing the body is simpler than navigating what comes after." He studied Maka's face in the moonlight. "The young men talk of war parties forming to the north. Chief Red Cloud grows impatient with broken promises. It is not a good time for whites in Dakota territory, even those under our protection." "I ride to the fort tomorrow," Maka replied. "I will learn what I can about the soldiers' movements and Red Cloud's intentions." "Good," Knowledge gives us choices. Standing Bear reclaimed his pipe. The woman with the fire-marked face. She carries an important story. Among our people, such marks would give her words weight. Perhaps it is the same with whites. Maka considered this thoughtfully. Among whites, scars like hers often cause rejection rather than respect. Their view of beauty leaves little room for visible suffering. Standing Bear frowned at this strange concept. Then they miss much wisdom, he concluded simply before walking away toward his own lodge. Dawn brought renewed activity to the camp. Children emerged first, their voices carrying across the valley as they fed dogs and collected water. Women began morning meal preparations, while men gathered to discuss hunting plans or tend to horses. Catherine woke to these unfamiliar sounds, momentarily disoriented by the conical ceiling above her and the smell of wood smoke and herbs. Memory returned gradually. The fire, her desperate flight, the creek bed, Maka finding her half dead, and finally, fragments of the healing ceremony. She attempted to sit up, wincing as her injured ankle protested the movement. A young Dakota woman, perhaps 16, entered the lodge as if summoned by Catherine's stirring. Without speaking, she assisted Catherine to a seated position, placing cushions behind her back for support. The girl's eyes flickered curiously to Catherine's scarred face, but showed neither disgust nor pity, merely acceptance of this distinguishing feature. The girl offered a wooden cup filled with water, then indicated Catherine's ankle with a questioning gesture. When Catherine nodded permission, the young woman carefully unwrapped the poultice water Lily had applied. The swelling had decreased significantly, though multicolored bruising still spread from ankle to mid-calf. "Young Fawn helps my mother," Maka's voice explained from the lodge entrance. "She doesn't speak your language, but understands more than she reveals." Young Fawn smiled slightly at this characterization, but continued her work without comment, applying fresh medicine to Catherine's ankle with gentle efficiency. "How are you feeling this morning?" Maka asked, entering the lodge fully, but maintaining a respectful distance. "Better," Catherine answered truthfully. "Weak, but present. Your mother's medicine is remarkable. Water Lily has studied healing ways since childhood. She combines traditional knowledge with practices she learned during her marriage to my father." Young Fawn completed her task and rose gracefully, speaking briefly to Maka in Dakota before exiting. "She says my mother will bring food soon," Maka translated, "and that you should not try walking yet." Catherine nodded acceptance of this instruction. An awkward silence fell between them, two people connected by extraordinary circumstances, but otherwise strangers. "I never properly thanked you," Catherine said finally. "You saved my life." Maka shrugged slightly. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Catherine replied with unexpected firmness. "They wouldn't. The wagon train left me behind when the fire came. They had a choice, and they chose their own survival over helping someone they considered different." Her hand unconsciously touched the scarred side of her face. Maka considered her words carefully. "Fear makes people act in ways they might later regret. A prairie fire leaves little time for conscience." "You're generous to excuse them," Catherine observed. "More generous than I feel capable of being at the moment." Before Maka could respond, Water Lily entered carrying a small wooden bowl of stew. The rich aroma of buffalo meat and prairie turnips filled the lodge, reminding Catherine how long it had been since she'd eaten properly. "You will eat all," Water Lily instructed, handing Catherine the bowl and a horn spoon. "Then we talk." Epheme. Stew was delicious, simple but hearty, with unfamiliar herbs that added complexity to the flavor. Catherine ate slowly but steadily, aware of Water Lily's evaluating gaze. When she finished, the older woman nodded with approval. "Good. Your spirit has hunger. This means it fights to stay in this world." Water Lily settled cross-legged near Catherine, her posture effortlessly dignified despite her age. "Now tell us how fire marked you the first time." The directness of the question startled Catherine. Among whites, her scars were an uncomfortable subject acknowledged only through sideways glances and whispered speculation. Water Lily's straightforward inquiry, delivered without pity or revulsion, was refreshingly honest. "I was 17, Catherine began hesitantly. "There was a warehouse fire near Boston Harbor. My mother and I were shopping nearby when we heard the alarm. Catherine paused, the memory still painful despite the years that had passed. "She went to help a trapped child. I followed. We found the child and my mother passed her to me, but as we tried to escape, a burning beam fell." Her hand moved unconsciously to the scarred side of her face. "My mother pushed me mostly clear, but was trapped herself. I tried to help her, but the flames—" Catherine's voice faltered. "By the time firefighters pulled me out, it was too late for her." Water Lily listened intently, her dark eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. When Catherine finished, the older woman reached out unexpectedly, her fingers gently tracing the scar tissue that covered half of Catherine's face. "Your mother's spirit lives in these marks," she stated with quiet certainty. "She gave her life for the child and marked you with courage. Among my people, such scars would be honored, not hidden." The simple statement, delivered without sentimentality but with absolute conviction, brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. For 9 years, her scars had defined her as damaged, ruined, an object of pity or revulsion. Water Lily's perspective, that they represented sacrifice and survival rather than disfigurement, offered a transformative reframing she had never considered. Maka, who had remained silent during this exchange, now spoke softly. "The Lakota believe physical marks tell important stories. A warrior's scars narrate his bravery. A mother's stretched skin represents the children she has brought into the world. Nothing that shapes us is meant to be hidden or denied." Water Lily rose in a single, fluid movement. "Today you rest. Tomorrow, if fever stays away, you sit outside for fresh air. Your spirit needs sun after walking so close to Shadowlands." With that practical assessment, she gathered the empty bowl and departed, leaving Catherine and Maka alone once more. "I'm riding to Fort Laramie today," Maka informed her. "I'll tell them you survived and are recovering. Is there a message you wish me to convey, or people to notify about your survival?" Catherine considered this offer. "If any of the Wilsons survived, Sarah or Frank Wilson and their children, please tell them I'm alive. They were kind to me when others weren't." She hesitated before adding, "But I have no family remaining to notify. My father died last autumn. There's no one waiting for news of me." Maka nodded, acknowledging both her message and the underlying loneliness it revealed. "I should return by tomorrow evening. The camp is safe, but it would be best if you remain in this lodge while I'm gone. Not everyone welcomes a white presence, even an injured one." "I understand," Catherine replied, recognizing the complex position her presence created. "Your mother and young fawn have shown me great kindness. I won't do anything to complicate that." As Maka turned to leave, a thought struck her. "Wait, what should I call your mother? Water Lily seems too familiar from a stranger." A rare smile crossed Maka's face. "Among our people, she is Water Lily. To the whites at Fort Laramie, she was once Catherine Thompson. She reclaimed her Lakota name when she returned to her people. Call her what feels right when the moment comes." With that ambiguous guidance, he departed, leaving Catherine to contemplate the strange twists of fate that had brought her, an outcast among her own kind, into the care of people who viewed her defining characteristic not as a flaw, but as a mark of significance. Outside the lodge, life in the Lakota camp continued its rhythmic patterns, following traditions established through countless generations. Catherine listened to the unfamiliar sounds, recognizing that her survival now depended on her ability to navigate not just physical recovery, but the complex cultural territory she had unwittingly entered. A territory where her scarred face might ironically prove more asset than liability. Fort Laramie stood as an island of Eastern civilization amid the vast wilderness of the Western Territories. Its whitewashed buildings, parade ground, and American flag created a deliberate contrast to the natural landscape, a statement of permanence and authority in a region undergoing rapid transformation. Maka approached the fort with practiced neutrality, his clothing and bearing carefully calibrated to navigate the complex terrain of his dual identity. Today, he wore buckskin pants and a cavalry-style shirt, his long hair tied back neatly. Experience had taught him that appearance significantly, influenced how his information would be received. The sentries recognized him immediately as one of the few reliable scouts who could move comfortably between white and native worlds. Maka was a valuable asset to the fort's commanders despite lingering prejudice among some soldiers. "Thompson," the corporal at the gate acknowledged with a nod. "Lieutenant Wells has been asking after you, says to send you directly when you showed up." Maka dismounted, leading his horse toward the headquarters building. He noted increased activity around the fort, more wagons than usual. Civilians gathered in small groups, an atmosphere of tension that hadn't been present a few days prior when he departed to search for survivors. Lieutenant James Wells was reviewing maps when Maka entered his office. At 34, Wells was younger than most officers of his rank. His rapid advancement, the result of both battlefield merit during the recent war and a practical intelligence that recognized value in unexpected places, including in Sioux. Scouts other officers might dismiss. "Thompson," Wells greeted him, setting aside his work. "Found any more survivors from the Henderson train?" "One," Maka confirmed. "A woman named Catherine Mitchell. Badly injured, but alive." Wells frowned, consulting a document on his desk. "Mitchell, not on our survivor list. Where is she now?" Here came the delicate part of the conversation. "Recovering at my mother's lodge. She was too weak to transport directly to the fort. Severe ankle injury, dehydration, exposure." The lieutenant's expression shifted, professional concern mixing with political calculation. "At the Dakota camp, that complicates matters." "She's receiving good care," Maka stated simply. "My mother's healing skills are well known." "It's not the quality of care that concerns me," Wells responded, gesturing for Maka to sit. "It's the timing. Things have deteriorated while you've been tracking survivors." He pushed the map toward Maka, indicating several marked locations. 3 more mining parties have pushed into treaty territory. Red Cloud's warriors attacked one 2 days ago, killed 5 men. Army patrols have been doubled along the Bozeman Trail, and there's talk in Washington about a more permanent military presence in the disputed territories. Maka studied the map, recognizing the implications immediately. The 1868 treaty had established clear boundaries for white settlement, with specific regions designated as exclusive Sioux territory. The discovery of gold had rendered those boundaries increasingly meaningless to opportunistic miners, while the government's tepid enforcement created growing resentment among tribal leaders. "A white woman in a Lakota camp becomes a political problem in this climate," Wells continued. "Especially with rumors circulating." "What rumors?" Maka asked, though he could already anticipate the answer. "That some bands are taking white captives, mostly false, of course, usual frontier hysteria. But having an actual white woman in a Sioux camp won't help matters, even if she's there for legitimate medical reasons." Maka absorbed this information with outward calm that masked increasing concern. "She needs at least another week before she can travel safely. Her injuries were severe." Wells drummed his fingers on the desk. "I trust your judgment, Thompson, but my superiors might see things differently." He sighed. "There's something else. You should know. The Henderson wagon train survivors. They've been telling stories, not particularly flattering ones, about your Miss Mitchell. This unexpected turn caught Mucker off guard. What kind of stories? According to them, she was traveling with a family named Wilson. When the fire hit, she apparently grabbed their valuables and fled, leaving the family behind. Wells watched Mucker's reaction closely. The Wilsons didn't make it. Only their oldest boy survived, badly burned. He's the one who reported seeing her run with their possessions. The account contradicted Catherine's experience entirely. She had mentioned saving the Wilson family's documents, but in her telling, it was the family who had left first, abandoning her when the fire threatened their wagon. The boy is traumatized and grieving, Wells continued, might be misremembering in his confusion, but it's created a certain sentiment among the survivors. They're not exactly mourning her presumed death. Maka felt a rush of protective instinct, surprising in its intensity. She was nearly dead when I found her, half-starved, severely dehydrated, her ankle badly damaged. Does that sound like someone who abandoned others to save herself? Wells held up a placating hand. I'm just telling you what's being said. People need someone to blame when tragedy strikes. The scarred woman who kept to herself makes an easy target. She bears old burn scars, Maka acknowledged. Her face was injured in a previous fire where she lost her mother, which makes the story more complicated, not less. Wells rose, moving to the window that overlooked the fort's bustling yard. You need to bring her in as soon as she's well enough to travel, Thompson, for her safety as much as anything. If tensions keep escalating with Red Cloud's bands, her position becomes increasingly precarious. Maka recognized the truth in this assessment, even as he bristled at its implications. I gave my word she would receive proper care before being moved, and she will, Wells assured him, but no longer than necessary. The Army's strained enough managing legitimate grievances without adding a potential captivity narrative to inflame public opinion back east. Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the window, Maka saw a wagon pull into the fort's central yard, a civilian vehicle with military escort. Several figures descended, including a boy with bandaged arms and face, whom Maka assumed must be the Wilson child. That's them now, Wells confirmed. The survivors coming for their daily medical check. I should warn you, Thompson, they've been asking questions about whether more bodies were found, about the Sioux camps in the region. If they learn you've taken a survivor to a native camp instead of bringing her here, he left the implication hanging. Frontier justice could be swift and indiscriminate, especially when filtered through grief and cultural prejudice. I understand, Maka said, rising. I came to inquire about supply availability as well, medicine, food provisions. Wells nodded, opening a drawer to retrieve a requisition form. Write down what you need. I'll authorize it within reason. But remember what? I said 1 week, no more. After that, she comes to the fort, or I'll have to send an official party to retrieve her. As Maka completed the requisition, his mind worked through alternatives. Catherine's recovery might take longer than the lieutenant's timeline allowed, but arguing would only raise suspicions. Better to accept the terms officially while preparing contingency plans privately. With the supply list completed and approved, Maka prepared to depart before the Henderson survivors could notice his presence. As he crossed the parade ground toward the quartermaster's office, however, a voice called out behind him, "Mr. Thompson." "A moment, please." Maka turned to find a middle-aged man with a clergyman's collar approaching, Reverend Isaiah Harmon, who served as both chaplain to the fort and missionary to local tribes. His lean face and earnest expression projected sincerity, though Maka had always found the man's certainty about spiritual matters somewhat grating. "Reverend," Maka acknowledged with a nod. "I've just heard you found another survivor," Harmon said without preamble. "A woman being cared for by your mother's people. Is this true?" News traveled quickly within the fort's confined community. Yes, she was badly injured and couldn't be transported directly here. The missionary's eyes lit with purpose. This is providence. I've been praying for an opportunity to establish better relations with the Lakota bands in that region. Perhaps I could accompany you back, offer spiritual comfort to the woman while building connections with the tribe. The suggestion set alarm bells ringing in Maka's mind. Harmon's well-intentioned but culturally insensitive proselytizing had created tension on previous occasions. The last thing Catherine's delicate situation needed was a missionary determined to save both her and her Lakota hosts. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend," Maka replied carefully, "but the camp is wary of visitors currently. With tensions rising along the Bozeman Trail, this isn't the ideal moment for new missionary efforts." Disappointment crossed Harmon's face, followed by a stubborn resolve Maka recognized from previous encounters. All the more reason why Christian charity must be demonstrated in these troubled times. The woman must be terrified, alone among strangers whose language and customs are foreign to her. Spiritual guidance could bring tremendous comfort. Before Maka could formulate a diplomatic refusal, a sharp voice interrupted their conversation. "Is it true? You found one of them alive?" A boy of perhaps 12 stood several paces away, his arms and half his face wrapped in bandages. Despite his injuries, his stance projected anger rather than weakness. A soldier hovered nearby, clearly assigned to watch over the child, but uncertain how to intervene. "This is private business, son," the missionary began, but the boy cut him off. "Was it her? The woman with the burned face? Miss Mitchell?" Maka recognized the Wilson boy instantly. The child's hostile tone confirmed the lieutenant's warning about sentiment among the survivors. "You should be resting, not wandering." "The fort," Maka responded, deliberately avoiding the direct question. "She took our money pouch," the boy insisted, his uninjured eye blazing with accusation. "When the fire came, she grabbed it and ran, left us behind. My parents and sisters burned because of her." The raw grief behind the accusation was genuine, though Maka suspected the narrative had been shaped by adult interpretations and the boy's traumatized experience. Before he could respond, the soldier stepped forward, placing a gentle but firm hand on the child's shoulder. "Come along, Thomas. Dr. Harrison is waiting to change your bandages. You can talk to Mr. Thompson another time." As the soldier led the reluctant boy away, Reverend Harmon turned to Maka with renewed determination. "You see, this situation requires delicate handling. A Christian presence could help the woman face these accusations with proper spiritual preparation. What she needs is time to heal physically before confronting such matters," Maka countered. "I'll convey your offer of assistance when appropriate." Recognizing he would get no further, the missionary reluctantly conceded, though his parting words carried an unmistakable warning. "Please remember that delay can sometimes compound difficulties, Mr. Thompson. I pray you're making the right choice for all concerned." After collecting the authorized supplies, Maka departed Fort Laramie with significantly more concerns than he'd arrived with. The political landscape had shifted dangerously during his absence, transforming Catherine's presence in the Lakota camp from a straightforward medical necessity into a potentially explosive situation. As he rode northward toward Eagle Creek, Maka weighed his options. Lieutenant Wells had granted a week, barely enough time for Catherine's physical recovery, let alone preparation for the accusations awaiting her. Standing Bear's warnings about increasing tensions along tribal borders now carried additional weight, placing Catherine at the intersection of multiple conflicts. Most troubling was the Wilson boy's accusation. Maka had seen nothing among Catherine's meager possessions to suggest theft, and her own account of abandonment had the ring of truth. But frontier justice rarely concerned itself with nuanced evidence, especially when natives were involved in sheltering an accused party. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie as Maka pushed his horse to maintain a steady pace. In the distance, dark clouds gathered along the western horizon, a summer thunderstorm brewing over the mountains. The approaching turbulence seemed an apt metaphor for the situation he was riding toward. Catherine Mitchell had survived 2 encounters, with fire only to find herself caught in an equally dangerous conflagration of cultural tensions, frontier prejudices, and personal accusations. Getting her safely through this new threat would require more than medical skill. It would demand careful navigation of complex human currents increasingly prone to violence. As lightning flickered distant warning across the darkening sky, Maka considered what awaited at Eagle Creek, a woman healing under his mother's care, a tribe increasingly concerned about white encroachment, and a timeline that left little room for error. The coming days would test not only Catherine's resilience, but his own ability to bridge the widening gap between the worlds he straddled. The day after Maka's departure for Fort Laramie, Catherine's recovery progressed enough that Water Lily deemed her ready to sit outside the lodge. Young Fawn arrived mid-morning with a walking stick carved from ash wood, its handle polished smooth from years of use. "Water Lily says you walk small distance today," the girl explained in halting English, surprising Catherine, who hadn't realized. She spoke any at all. "Good for healing, not stay inside too much." With Young Fawn's support, Catherine managed to stand and take her first tentative steps in days. Her ankle throbbed, but bore her weight when assisted by the walking stick. Moving carefully, she emerged from the lodge into bright sunshine that momentarily blinded her after days in the dim interior. As her vision adjusted, Catherine took in the full scope of the Lakota camp for the first time. 30 conical teepees, arranged in a rough circle around a central gathering space, each painted with symbolic designs that Catherine now recognized held spiritual significance. Women worked at various tasks, scraping hides stretched on wooden frames, weaving baskets from reeds gathered at the creek's edge, stirring cooking pots suspended over carefully tended fires. Children played games with hoops and sticks, their laughter carrying across the camp. Several old men sat in a circle, passing a ceremonial pipe as they discussed matters Catherine couldn't comprehend. Young Fawn guided her to a sitting place on a buffalo robe, spread beneath a cottonwood tree near Water Lily's lodge. The location offered both shade and a view of daily camp activities, while keeping Catherine close enough to retreat quickly if her strength faltered. "Rest here," Young Fawn instructed. "I bring water and food soon." Left alone, Catherine felt suddenly conspicuous. Though she attempted to observe discreetly, she was aware of being equally observed. Children paused in their games to stare openly at the pale woman with the scarred face. Women glanced her way while continuing their tasks, their expressions revealing varying degrees of curiosity, indifference, or wariness. An elderly woman approached, her face deeply lined from decades of prairie sun and weather. Without speaking, she settled on the buffalo robe beside Catherine, arranging her worn buckskin dress with dignified movements. For several minutes, she simply sat in companionable silence, watching the camp's activities alongside Catherine. "I am Singing Bird," she finally said in surprisingly clear English. "Water Lily's aunt. I learned English from missionaries long ago." She studied Catherine's face with the direct gaze characteristic of the Lakota. "You are the woman twice marked by fire," Catherine nodded, increasingly accustomed to the Lakota's straightforward references to her scars. "Yes, my name is Catherine Mitchell." Singing Bird repeated the name, shaping the unfamiliar syllables carefully. "Catherine." She considered this before adding, "Our people might call you Woman Who Walks Through Fire." A strong name. The designation startled Catherine. Among whites, her scars had defined her as damaged or pitiable. Here they were being reinterpreted as symbols of strength and resilience. Water Lily says, "You lost your mother to the first fire," Singing Bird continued. "I lost my daughter to sickness that came with white traders. Loss speaks its own language. Beyond English or Lakota, the simple acknowledgement of shared experience, offered without pretense or awkward sympathy, created an unexpected connection between them." Before Catherine could respond, young Fawn returned with a wooden bowl containing a stew of unfamiliar roots and dried meat, along with a water skin decorated with geometric patterns. As Catherine ate, Singing Bird pointed out various aspects of camp life, providing context Catherine would have otherwise missed. "The women working those hides will make winter robes. Each family needs 5 new ones before snow comes." She indicated another group sorting plants on woven mats. "Those are medicine women learning from Water Lily. The plants they prepare will heal coughs when winter brings chest sickness." Catherine gradually realized Singing Bird was offering more than casual explanation. She was demonstrating how the Lakota's daily activities connected to a complex system of practical knowledge, spiritual beliefs, and communal responsibility. "Everything has purpose," Singing Bird observed, noting Catherine's attentiveness. "Everything connects. Whites often miss this, seeing only separate pieces." The observation, delivered without judgment, caused Catherine to reflect on her own cultural assumptions. Her education in Boston had emphasized categorization and separation, science distinct from spirituality, individual achievement valued. Above communal harmony, humans positioned as masters rather than participants in the natural world. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several children who had overcome their initial shyness. One bold girl of perhaps 7 approached directly, pointing to Catherine's scarred cheek with unabashed curiosity. "She asks how you got your fire marks," Singing Bird translated, her tone suggesting the question was considered appropriate rather than rude. Catherine hesitated, unsure how to explain a Boston warehouse fire to children who likely had never seen a city. Before she could attempt an answer, Water Lily appeared, speaking firmly to the children in Lakota. Though Catherine couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear from the children's immediate attentiveness. "She tells them your story is yours to share when ready, not to be demanded like treats," Singing Bird explained, "but also that your marks show you have important lessons to teach when the time is right." Water Lily knelt beside Catherine, her practiced hands checking the ankles swelling and her forehead for fever signs. Satisfied with her patient's progress, she spoke to Singing Bird in Lakota. A brief exchange that concluded with both women looking at Catherine expectantly. "My niece asks if you wish to learn simple tasks while you heal," Singing Bird translated. "Sitting idle troubles the spirit when body mends." The offer surprised Catherine. She had assumed her status as invalid and outsider would limit her to passive observation. "I would like that very much," she responded, genuinely pleased at the prospect of occupation. Water Lily nodded approval before departing briefly, returning with a partially completed basket and a bundle of reeds soaking in a wooden bowl. She demonstrated the basic weaving technique, her fingers moving with practiced precision despite their weathered appearance. The pattern was more complex than it initially appeared, requiring concentration and dexterity. Catherine's first attempts were clumsy, the reeds refusing to bend as directed. Water Lily corrected her patiently, guiding her hands until the movements became more natural. The physical activity provided welcome distraction from discomfort, while the mental focus required prevented brooding on her uncertain future. As the morning progressed, Catherine became aware of a subtle shift in the camp's atmosphere toward her. Her willingness to learn a traditional skill, combined with Water Lily's evident acceptance, seemed to soften initial wariness. Women passing by offered approving nods at her efforts. One stopped to demonstrate a technique for securing the reed, ends more tightly, communication transcending their language barrier through demonstration and mimicry. By midday, as shadows shortened beneath the relentless summer sun, Catherine had completed a small section of serviceable, if imperfect, basketwork. Water Lily examined it closely before offering a satisfied nod. Not effusive praise, but sincere acknowledgement of acceptable effort. Young Fawn brought the midday meal, flat bread made from ground corn and a dried fruit that Catherine didn't recognize but found pleasantly sweet. As they ate, Catherine noticed several warriors returning to camp, their horses laden with freshly killed antelope. The successful hunt created a ripple of activity as women gathered to begin the butchering process. "Tonight there will be feast," Singing Bird explained. "First summer hunt brings celebration. You are fortunate to witness this." The prospect of a larger gathering caused Catherine momentary anxiety. Her presence remained controversial among some camp members, particularly the younger warriors. Without Marker present to mediate, a larger social gathering might expose tensions her limited strength wasn't prepared to navigate. Water Lily seemed to sense her concerns. Through Singing Bird's translation, she explained, "You will watch from my lodge entrance, close enough to observe, removed enough to rest. The people must become accustomed to your presence gradually, as one adjusts eyes to sunlight after darkness." The wisdom of this approach impressed Catherine. Water Lily understood not only physical healing, but the delicate social integration required for an outsider in a close-knit community. Her methods were neither hurried nor unnecessarily delayed, but calibrated to natural rhythms of both body and community. As afternoon advanced, Catherine returned to the lodge for needed rest. The brief excursion had taxed her limited strength, but brought valuable insights into the community that had offered her sanctuary. She slept deeply, awakening only when young Fawn gently roused her as evening approached. The girl had brought a clean buckskin dress and a bone comb for Catherine's hair, which had become tangled during her illness. With practical efficiency, young Fawn helped Catherine change from her sleeping clothes into the new garment, simply cut but beautifully tanned to butter-soft consistency. "Water Lily make this long ago," young Fawn explained, as Catherine admired the garment's quality. "For trading at Fort, now for you." The gift's significance wasn't lost on Catherine. Practical clothing, adapted to her current environment, represented acceptance of her extended presence, while its origin as a trade item acknowledged the temporary nature of her stay. A thoughtful balance characteristic of Water Lily's approach. Young Vaughan indicated Catherine should sit on a low stool, then began gently combing the tangles from her auburn hair. The simple act of grooming, something Catherine had managed independently since childhood, unexpectedly brought tears to her eyes. This basic human care, one woman tending another's needs without obligation or compensation, highlighted how isolated she had become after her father's death. Once her hair was neatly braided, young Fawn helped Catherine to the lodge entrance, where a sitting place had been prepared, buffalo robes arranged to provide comfort while allowing her to observe the gathering taking place in the camp's central area. From this vantage point, Catherine watched as the community assembled for the celebration. The antelope meat roasted on spits over several cooking fires, tended by women who periodically basted the meat with herb-infused mixtures. Children had been freshly bathed, their hair adorned with feathers or beads. Men wore their finest garments, some displaying war honors through specific feathers or ornaments that Catherine now recognized carried significant meaning rather than mere decoration. The gathering began with ceremony rather than immediate feasting. Standing Bear, whose status as an elder Catherine had discerned during her brief morning observation, addressed the assembled community. Though she couldn't understand his words, his dignified bearing and the respectful attention he received communicated the speech's importance. "He gives thanks for successful hunt," Singing Bird translated, having joined Catherine at her observation post. "Thanks to Creator, to the antelope who gave life so people might live, to the hunters who showed skill and respect in the taking. The concept of thanking the animal whose life had been taken for food was foreign to Catherine's experience. Eastern butcher shops separated consumers entirely from the living creatures that became their meals. This direct acknowledgement of life sacrifice to sustain other life reflected a worldview that recognized connections her own culture often obscured. As the celebration progressed, Catherine observed traditions that transformed a simple meal into community affirmation. Specific portions were distributed according to protocols that honored elders, recognized hunters' contributions, and ensured every member received share regardless of status. Music, provided by drums and bone whistles, accompanied stories told by elders, histories that Singing Bird explained preserved tribal knowledge across generations. Tonight they tell how Dakota first received fire in ancient times, she translated during one elaborate narrative. How thunder beings taught proper respect for its power. Good story for you to hear, woman who walks through fire. Throughout the evening, Catherine remained physically separated, yet increasingly connected to the community through Singing Bird's translations and explanations. Though still an outsider, she was being offered genuine glimpses into Lakota worldview, education that few whites ever received beyond superficial observation. As darkness settled fully over the camp, stars emerging in brilliant profusion across the prairie sky, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary turn her journey had taken. The catastrophe that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her into a culture that, ironically, seemed better equipped to help her make sense of her scarred existence than the civilized society that had increasingly rejected her. Here, among people whites dismissed as savages, her defining characteristic was being reinterpreted not as disfigurement, but as meaningful experience. Her survival of fire, twice, was viewed with respect rather than pity. Her scars told a story worth hearing rather than a tragedy to be politely ignored. Water Lily approached as the celebration began winding down, children being shepherded to bed, while adults continued quieter conversations around dying fires. Her assessment of Catherine's condition was swift but thorough. Checking her pulse at wrist and neck, noting the clarity of her eyes, the color returned to previously pallid cheeks. "You heal strong," she pronounced with satisfaction. "Tomorrow more walking, more basket work." She paused, studying Catherine's expression in the firelight. "You have questions. Ask now while mind is clear." Catherine considered carefully before responding. "Why are you helping me? I'm a stranger. Our peoples are often enemies, yet you've given medicine, shelter, clothing, even knowledge few whites ever receive." Water Lily settled beside her, silent for long moments before answering. "I lived 17 summers among whites when married to Skywatcher's father. Some showed kindness, some showed hate. I learned to see the person, not just the people." She touched Catherine's scarred cheek with gentle fingers. "Fire has tested you twice. Such testing shapes spirit as it marks flesh. I help because you fought to live when easier to surrender. Such courage deserves response, regardless of birth or language." The simple explanation, delivered without sentimentality but with absolute conviction, touched Catherine deeply. Water Lily's philosophy transcended the prejudices that increasingly divided their peoples, a perspective gained through her own navigation of cultural boundaries during her marriage to Maka's father. "Rest now," Water Lily instructed, rising with fluid grace despite her years. "Tomorrow brings new learning." As Catherine settled onto her sleeping robes that night, the distant sounds of the concluding celebration mingling with night insects, chorus, she found herself contemplating layers of insight gained during this single day. Beyond practical knowledge of basketry and Lakota customs, she had glimpsed a fundamentally different way of perceiving the world, one that recognized interdependence rather than separation, that found meaning in experiences her own culture. Dismissed as tragic misfortune, whether this new understanding would protect her from the uncertain future that awaited remained to be seen. But it had already begun reshaping her perception of herself, not as Catherine Mitchell, disfigured spinster from Boston, but perhaps as the woman Singing Bird had named, Woman Who Walks Through Fire, someone whose scars testified to survival, rather than victimhood. Storm clouds gathered on the western horizon as Maka returned to Eagle Creek, their dark masses mirroring his troubled thoughts. The camp appeared peaceful in the late afternoon light, children playing near the creek bank, women finishing daily tasks, older men gathered in discussion circles. This tranquility would soon be disrupted by the news he carried from Fort Laramie. He spotted Catherine immediately. She sat outside Water Lily's lodge, working on what appeared to be a basket under his mother's watchful guidance. The sight surprised him. Not just her presence outside, but the evident improvement in her condition. Color had returned to her face, and though still clearly weak, she moved with more confidence than he had expected after so short a recovery period. Water Lily noticed him first, rising with a slight nod of greeting that communicated both welcome and awareness that his expression carried concerns. Catherine followed her gaze, meeting Maka's eyes with a smile that faltered slightly as she recognized his troubled demeanor. Dismounting near the lodge, Maka was immediately surrounded by children eager for treats or stories from the fort. He distributed the hard candy he'd purchased from the sutler's store, a ritual they'd come to expect from his visits to white settlements. Their excitement provided a momentary distraction from the difficult conversations ahead. "You've been teaching her basketry," he observed to his mother in Lakota as the children scattered with their treasures. Water Lily nodded. Her hands learned quickly, her spirit even faster. She studied her son's face. "You bring storm clouds from the fort. Bad news?" "News that requires careful handling," he confirmed. "We should speak privately." Catherine watched this exchange with evident curiosity, unable to understand the words, but recognizing their serious tone. When Maka approached her, she attempted to rise, wincing slightly as her injured ankle protested. "Don't stand," he said quickly. "You look better than when I left." "Your mother is a remarkable healer," Catherine replied, "and a patient teacher." She gestured to the half-completed basket beside her. "Though I fear my skills hardly justify her efforts." The simple exchange felt strangely normal, as if they were old acquaintances rather than people thrown together by extraordinary circumstances. This comfortable familiarity made what he must tell her even more difficult. "We need to talk," Maka said, settling beside her. "About what I learned at Fort Laramie." Water Lily discreetly withdrew to give them privacy, though Maka knew she would remain within calling distance. Catherine's expression grew serious as she set aside her basketry work. "The Wilsons," she asked, "did any of them survive?" Maka hesitated, weighing how to present the complicated truth. "The oldest boy survived, Thomas. He's recovering at the fort." Relief flooded Catherine's face. "Thank God. I was worried none of them made it. Sarah was so kind to me." "Is she?" "Thomas was the only survivor from their wagon," Maka interrupted gently. "I'm sorry." Grief flickered across Catherine's features, but something else accompanied it, a flash of confusion that confirmed Maka's suspicions about the boy's account. "There's something else," he continued carefully. "Thomas has been telling people a different version of what happened during the fire. He claims you took their valuables and abandoned the family when the flames reached your wagon." Catherine's shocked expression provided its own testimony. "That's not... I would never..." She stopped, collecting herself. "I tried to save what I could when their wagon caught fire. Sarah had already taken the children toward the center of the circle. I was bringing their documents, money pouch. Then the wagon exploded from the heat. I was thrown down the ravine. Her hand moved unconsciously to the small bundle she kept, near her sleeping place, the items she'd managed to save from the fire. I've been keeping them safe to return. I believe you, Maka assured her. But at the fort, another narrative has taken hold. The survivors need someone to blame for their losses. You're an easy target, a stranger marked by previous fire. He hesitated before adding, your appearance made you an outsider even before. The fire, that makes you vulnerable now. Rather than offense at this blunt assessment, Catherine's expression reflected resignation. It's not the first time my scars have made me the object of suspicion or gossip, she said quietly. But theft, abandonment, I never imagined such accusations. There's more, Maka continued reluctantly. Lieutenant Wells has given us 1 week, now 5 days, to bring you to the fort. After that, he'll send soldiers to escort you. Why? The urgency. I'm still recovering. Maka explained the deteriorating relations between settlers and Sioux, the violations of treaty boundaries, Red Cloud's increasing militancy, and the political complications of a white woman in a native camp. During such tensions, they fear I'm being held captive, Catherine concluded, understanding dawning in her eyes, that I'll become a symbol for frontier newspapers, the scarred woman imprisoned by savages. The bitterness in her voice conveyed how clearly she recognized the narrative that would be constructed regardless of truth. Exactly. And with the accusations about the Wilson family, your reception at the fort will not be welcoming. Maka hesitated before sharing his final concern. The Reverend Harmon knows of your presence here. He's eager to rescue you, bringing Christian comfort to your heathen captivity. Despite the seriousness of their discussion, this prompted a small smile from Catherine. I attended church every Sunday of my life until my father's death. Somehow I've managed these days without Reverend Harmon's spiritual guidance. Her unexpected humor in the face of mounting complications impressed Maka. This woman possessed a resilience that continued to surprise him. What are my options? She asked pragmatically. Limited, Maka admitted. You could return to the fort as ordered, face the accusations and hope for fair treatment. Or, he paused, considering the alternative he'd been contemplating during his ride back to camp. Or, Catherine prompted, there's a mission settlement 3 days' ride north along the Powder River. Sister Mary Catherine runs it independently of army. Oversight? She takes in anyone needing shelter, native women escaping difficult situations, orphaned children, occasionally people like yourself who don't fit neatly into either world. Catherine considered this alternative thoughtfully. Would I be welcome there, a scarred woman with accusations hanging over her? Sister Mary doesn't concern herself with appearances or rumors. She judges people by their actions in her presence, not stories about their past. Maka smiled slightly. She and my mother share that philosophy, despite practicing different spiritual traditions. Could I reach this mission before Lieutenant Wells sends soldiers? If we leave tomorrow and travel steadily, yes. Maka emphasized the word we deliberately. I would escort you there myself. The implications of this offer were significant. It meant Maka believed her version of events over the Wilson boys' account. It meant risking his position with the army to help her avoid potentially unjust treatment. It meant additional days away from his scouting duties during an increasingly volatile time. Before Catherine could respond, Water Lily rejoined them, having apparently heard enough of their conversation to understand the situation. She spoke directly to Catherine, rather than through Maka's translation. You are stronger now, but not yet strong enough for hard journey, she assessed candidly. Medicine can help, decision must be yours. Catherine looked between mother and son, these unlikely allies who had saved her life and now offered continuation of that protection. "What would you advise?" she asked Water Lily directly. The older woman considered before responding. "Fort brings judgment without understanding. Mission brings shelter with possibility." She touched Catherine's scarred cheek with characteristic directness. "You have walked through fire twice already. Third journey requires new path, not returning to old ones." As dusk descended over the camp, the three continued their discussion, weighing practicalities against principles. Other tribal members occasionally glanced their way, sensing important decisions being made, but respectfully maintaining distance. Standing Bear eventually approached, his weathered face revealing he had heard about the fort's demands. After a brief consultation with Water Lily in Dakota, he addressed Catherine through Maka's translation. "Our council has considered your presence among us. Some wanted you sent to the fort immediately to prevent soldier trouble. Others saw opportunity for showing whites that Lakota healing ways surpassed their medicine." The elder studied Catherine's face before continuing. "I say different thing. I say scarred woman has survived fire that would kill most. Such strength deserves chance to choose own path, not have it chosen by others' fear." His words carried the weight of tribal authority. Without explicitly saying so, Standing Bear was offering the camp's blessing for whatever decision Catherine made, even if it potentially complicated their relations with the fort. As night fell fully, stars appearing in brilliant profusion across the vast prairie sky, Catherine reached her decision. The mission settlement offered what she needed most: time to heal completely, distance from accusations she couldn't disprove, and community that wouldn't judge her by appearance or rumor. "I'll go to Sister Mary's mission," she told Maka. "If you're still willing to guide me there." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "We'll leave at dawn. Light packs, steady travel. Water Lily will prepare medicine for your journey." That night, as preparations were made for their departure, Catherine sat outside Water Lily's lodge, contemplating the stars overhead. The familiar constellations seemed somehow different here, brighter, closer, more significant than they had appeared in Boston or during the wagon train journey. Perhaps it was the Lakota perspective influencing her perception, their belief that everything connected in ways her own culture often overlooked. Water Lily joined her, carrying a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "Medicine for your journey," she explained, placing it in Catherine's hands. "For pain, for strength, for fever if it returns." "Thank you," Catherine said, the simple phrase inadequate for the multiple layers of gratitude she felt. "For everything. For seeing me as more than my scars." Water Lily studied her thoughtfully. "Scars tell story of living, no different from wrinkles of age, marks of childbearing, calluses from work. Bodies speak truth of our journeys." She paused before adding, "White people fear such truths, try to hide them. Strange way to live." The observation, delivered without judgment but with genuine puzzlement, prompted Catherine to see her own culture through new eyes. How much energy she had expended trying to minimize her scars, special hairstyles, strategic veils, remaining in shadows during social gatherings, all to conform to a beauty standard that rejected visible evidence of suffering or survival. "Among my people, you would always be woman who walks through fire," Water Lily continued. "Name of respect, not pity." Impulsively, Catherine reached for the older woman's hand. "I will remember that, whatever awaits me at the mission or beyond. I will try to live worthy of such a name." Dawn arrived with low-hanging mist that transformed the camp into a dreamlike landscape of shadowy teepees and ghostly figures moving through swirling vapor. Catherine emerged from Water Lily's lodge, dressed for travel in the practical clothing her hosts had provided. Buckskin leggings beneath a simple dress, sturdy moccasins protecting her healing ankle, a warm blanket coat against morning chill. Young, Fawn had braided her hair in the Lakota style, weaving a protective charm into the plate, a small gesture of connection that touched Catherine deeply. Her few possessions, including the Wilson family documents and money pouch she had saved from the fire, were secured in a rawhide bag decorated with geometric patterns. Water Lily's medicine pouch hung at her waist, accessible during the journey. Ahead, Maka waited with 2 horses, his own pinto gelding and a gentle dun mare selected for Catherine's still recovering condition. He had outfitted both animals with minimal gear, emphasizing speed over comfort for the journey north. Standing Bear and several elders gathered to witness their departure, a formal acknowledgement of Catherine's status as someone who had shared their healing lodge, rather than merely passed through their camp. Water Lily performed a brief blessing ceremony, wafting sacred smoke over both travelers and their mounts before speaking words in Lakota that Maka translated as, "May your path be clear and your spirits protected." As they prepared to depart, young Fawn approached somewhat shyly, presenting Catherine with the basket they had worked on together, now completed with the girl's more skilled finishing. Though simple compared to the fine work of experienced Lakota women, it represented important connection, a tangible reminder of lessons shared across cultural boundaries. "Remember how to weave," young Fawn said in her limited English, "useful skill everywhere." Catherine accepted the gift with genuine appreciation, recognizing it symbolized more than practical craft. It represented knowledge transferred, traditions, shared human connection established despite differences. With final farewells exchanged, Maka and Catherine rode from the camp as morning sun burned away the mist, revealing the vast prairie stretching before them. 3 days' journey to Sister Mary's mission meant 3 days of continued recovery and reflection before facing whatever future awaited beyond. As they established a sustainable pace for Catherine's still healing body, Maka shared more about their destination. Sister Mary Catherine had established her mission 20 years earlier, initially to serve native communities, but eventually expanding to include anyone seeking sanctuary. Her independence from both church hierarchy and government oversight had created occasional tensions, but allowed her to operate according to conscience rather than policy. "She won't care about your scars or accusations from the fort," Maka assured Catherine. "Only your willingness to contribute to community while you heal completely." "And after that?" Catherine asked, the question that had hovered unspoken since her rescue finally finding voice. "What future exists for someone like me on the frontier?" Maka considered this thoughtfully before responding. "The frontier creates possibilities that don't exist back east. Out here, people are judged more by capability than appearance or background." He gestured toward the open landscape surrounding them. "Sister Mary needs teaching assistants for the children she shelters. Trading posts need literate people for record-keeping. Some settlements seek women willing to establish proper schools." The possibilities he outlined offered more hope than Catherine had dared consider since the fire. Her father's death and subsequent financial discovery had narrowed her options severely. The wagon train west had represented desperate gamble rather than considered choice. Now, despite the trauma of the Prairie fire and her near death, new pathways emerged, unexpected but perhaps better suited to the person she had become. As they rode northward beneath the boundless prairie sky, Catherine realized she had experienced more than physical healing during her brief stay among the Lakota. Water Lily, Young Fawn, and others had offered perspective that transformed how she viewed herself, not as Catherine Mitchell, disfigured and diminished by tragedy, but as someone whose experiences had forged unique strength and insight. Woman who walks through fire. The name Water Lily had given her carried no pity, no diminishment, but acknowledgement of resilience and survival. Whether or not others ever used it, Catherine would carry its meaning forward, a reminder that her scars testified to living through experiences that might have destroyed someone with less determination. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, its vastness both challenge and opportunity. Whatever awaited at Sister Mary's mission and beyond, Catherine faced it not as victim seeking charity, but as survivor, claiming her place in a world where traditional boundaries, between cultures, between past and future, between who she had been and who she might become, were as fluid as the prairie grasses bending beneath the endless western wind. Maka rode slightly ahead, his straight-backed silhouette representing the complex bridge between worlds that had made her survival possible. Neither fully white nor fully Lakota, he navigated divided territories with hard-earned wisdom. His example offered its own lesson, that one could honor multiple traditions while forging individual paths. As the first day's journey drew toward evening, storm clouds gathering and dispersing in dramatic formations across the western horizon, Catherine touched her scarred cheek in what had once been gesture of shame, but now carried different meaning. The prairie fire that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to unexpected sanctuary and insight. Her scars, both visible and hidden, had become map rather than burden, marking survival that transcended mere existence. Woman who walks through fire rode toward uncertain future, but with new understanding that illuminated more than just her. Impassed, the flames that had twice tested her had ultimately revealed what truly mattered. Not wholeness as defined by others, but the courage to forge meaningful life regardless of exterior markings. This wisdom, born of suffering yet transcending it, would guide her steps long after her physical injuries healed completely. The boundless prairie sky, painted in evening's spectacular oranges and purples, seemed to affirm this truth as Catherine and Mahka continued northward, two solitary figures moving steadily across the vast American wilderness, each carrying their own stories of fire, survival, and the profound human capacity for beginning anew. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.